What if the people who always seem to win, the power brokers, the charismatic leaders, the quiet dominators of every room, aren't lucky or even particularly talented? What if they've simply learned to operate by rules you were never taught to see? Picture this. You're standing in a room where everyone smiles, applauds, praises, but beneath every compliment is a calculation. You think you're making friends, you think you're rising. But what if you are not climbing a ladder at all? What if you were walking into a maze designed by someone who already knows how you all behave? Now ask yourself, why do some people in silence pull strings while others dance and spin for approval? Why do you, despite your intellect, your drive, still feel like you're a step behind? You sense there's a game being played, but no one gave you the rule book. Niccolò Machiavelli did, and you've probably misunderstood him. For centuries, his name has been whispered like a curse: Machiavellian, cold, cunning, ruthless. But here's the paradox. He never told people to be evil. He told them the truth. The raw, uncomfortable truth about how power actually works, not how we wish it did. We live in a world that feeds us narratives about fairness, merit, authenticity, but rewards those who master perception, not purity. You've seen it. The coworker who says little but climbs fast. The politician who seems bland yet holds unwavering influence. The friend who never seems fazed because they're playing a different game, one of deliberate detachment, strategic empathy, and above all, control. Machiavelli's insights weren't born in a vacuum. He lived in Renaissance Italy, a time of constant betrayal, papal corruption, and violent power struggles. His work, The Prince, wasn't a manifesto, it was a mirror, a reflection of human nature, not as it could be, but as it is when masks fall off and the stakes are survival. He wrote for those who were tired of being lied to, for those who knew that behind every smiling face, there's a motive waiting to be unmasked. So here's the disturbing question. If the world rewards those who see clearly, why do most of us still choose to be blind? The truth is, we crave comfort more than clarity. We want the world to be kind, even when history and our own lives keep proving otherwise. We say we value honesty, but recoil when it arrives without sugar. We admire confidence, but secretly fear those who wield it too well. And in doing so, we trade insight for innocence. But if you've ever sat in silence after being manipulated, if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling played without knowing how or why, then something in you already suspects this deeper reality. You've seen the tactics, the charm that distracts, the silence that disarms, the nice guy act that veils a trap, and yet, you've never had the language to name it. Until now. This isn't about becoming ruthless. It's about becoming conscious. Because once you see the structure behind the theater, once you decode the script others are acting from, you stop being a pawn, you become a player. You stop asking why me and begin asking what move comes next. So let's begin not with answers, but with the lens Machiavelli held up to humanity. Let's trace the contours of a mind that didn't just observe power, but exposed the mechanics behind it. Let's explore the unseen forces that shape our decisions and quietly dictate who we become. Machiavelli saw the world not as a dreamer, but as a surgeon cutting through illusion with a blade of brutal observation. His most provocative idea wasn't that power corrupts, but that corruption is the natural state of power. And those who understand this not just intellectually, but instinctively gain an eerie kind of freedom. You might be inclined to resist that thought. Surely the good should rise. Surely authenticity wins in the end. But ask yourself, how often has truth alone changed the outcome of a negotiation? How many honest leaders survive in politics without compromise, spin, or silence? How often do you hide parts of yourself just to belong? Machiavelli argued something few dare to say out loud, that virtue and effectiveness do not always walk hand in hand. In The Prince, he writes, "A man who wishes to make a vocation of being good at all times will come to ruin among so many who are not good." That line isn't a call to villainy. It's a warning that the world is not organized around your values, and if you act as if it is, you'll be devoured. So what's the tactic beneath the philosophy? Control perception. Shape fear. Offer people what they want, not what they need, and earn loyalty not through love, but utility. To Machiavelli, the ruler who is feared yet respected holds more power than the one who is loved yet fragile. That's not pessimism. That's mechanics. It's understanding that people are loyal only so long as it benefits them, and knowing how to remain useful in their eyes is the true form of influence. Now imagine how that idea translates to everyday life. Think of the colleague who anticipates your needs before you voice them, the friend who seems to read a room like a script, the manager who never shows anger, only calm authority. They aren't lucky, they're calibrated. They've learned that power isn't imposed, it's invited and then carefully maintained through emotional regulation, strategic detachment, and calculated revelation. Machiavelli doesn't advocate lying, he advocates timing the truth. And more importantly, understanding which truths are useful and which are dangerous. He says, "It is not necessary for a prince to have all the virtues, but it is necessary to appear to have them." You might recoil at that. Isn't that just manipulation? Perhaps. But reflect on your own life. Have you ever smiled when angry? Complimented when indifferent? You've already played the game. You just didn't know the rules. In this game, authenticity is currency, but so is illusion. The art lies in knowing when to spend which. Let's go deeper. There is a psychological concept called impression management, the ways in which people curate their image to control how others perceive them. From social media posts to job interviews to first dates, we all engage in this. Machiavelli simply codified it centuries earlier. He saw that power is perception, sustained through selective visibility. Just as a magician controls where you look, the skilled tactician controls what you think you're seeing. And here's the twist. The most effective players often seem the most genuine, not because they faking emotion, but because they've learned how to align expression with strategy. They don't lie. They channel. They know which part of themselves serves the moment best and summon it like an actor calls forth a role. This isn't deception. It's mastery. But then comes the deeper question: if we're all constantly shaping how we're seen, do we ever show our true selves? Or is identity itself a performance refined by years of audience feedback? You've felt it, the tension between who you are and who you were expected to be. The persona you wear in meetings versus the one in your private thoughts. The smile that masks your doubt. Machiavelli didn't deny the self, he just saw that most people aren't ready to accept its multiplicity, and those who are can bend their identity like metal to purpose. So when you feel powerless, ask, what am I revealing? What am I concealing? What image am I projecting, and does it serve me? Because if perception is the arena, you must learn to be both the player and the illusionist. You must walk the tightrope between who you are and who they need you to be. And that perhaps is the truest Machiavellian lesson: not to abandon your soul, but to master its presentation. Now let's step off the page and into the pulse of real life. Let's turn theory into emotion. What does all this look like, not in politics or courtrooms, but in the silent wars of the human heart? Imagine waking up in a life that feels perfectly arranged but curiously hollow. You check your messages, respond politely, sip your coffee, wear your competence like armor. You smile when required. You nod at the right moments. Everyone says you're doing great, but deep inside something tugs, something cold and quiet. A voice that asks, if this is success, why does it feel so borrowed? This isn't burnout, it's not depression, it is the realization that you've been playing a game whose rules you never consciously agreed to. And worse, you're winning. But at what? You've built a version of yourself to survive the world, to be liked, to be respected, to stay afloat. Maybe you've even become someone others admire, yet when you're alone, stripped of context and performance, you wonder if the real you got buried beneath the performance. And still you go on, because stopping would mean risking collapse, and because no one tells you how to be both strategic and sincere. This is the emotional battlefield Machiavelli never wrote directly about, but his insights burn right through its core, because beneath tactics and perception lies the oldest human conflict, the need to belong versus the will to be free. You learned to read people before you learned to read books. You scanned the room as a child, figuring out when to laugh, when to go silent, how to mold yourself to be accepted. That's not manipulation. That's survival. The human psyche is a social instrument, and over time you became fluent in performance, so fluent, in fact, that you forgot you were performing at all. And here's the trap. The better you get at adapting, the harder it becomes to know who you are underneath. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and known they were lying but admired how seamlessly they did it? Or sensed someone steering your emotions in conversation not through force but with surgical precision? That unsettling mix of respect and fear? That's the emotional signature of strategic authenticity. It's not just power, it's artistry. It's knowing how to make someone feel seen even while steering their perception. But this doesn't only happen at high levels of leadership or politics. It happens in relationships, in friendships, in families. Consider the partner who withholds affection not out of cruelty, but because they know it creates desire. The parent who praises selectively to mold behavior. The friend who always listens but rarely reveals. Power doesn't always shout. It whispers. And sometimes it loves you while still trying to control you. This doesn't make people evil, it makes them human. As Erich Fromm once wrote, the quest for certainty blocks the search for meaning. Uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers. So when someone manipulates you, they may not be doing it to dominate you, they might be doing it to make sense of a world that feels uncertain, unstable, unsafe. And what about you? How often do you present strength to hide vulnerability? How often do you withdraw emotionally, not out of indifference, but as a test, a way to see who will reach for you? This is where Machiavelli's cold clarity meets human warmth. The game of power doesn't erase the human heart, it includes it. The most skilled tacticians aren't devoid of feeling. They understand feeling so intimately that they can mimic, shape, and even provoke it with terrifying precision. They've studied how people ache, and they've learned to speak that ache fluently. But you don't need to abandon your soul to learn these tactics. In fact, your emotional wounds may be your sharpest tools. The times you were used, betrayed, ignored. Those moments etched maps into your nervous system. You already know the terrain. Now, you're just learning how to walk it with eyes open. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That includes your emotional patterns, your strategic reflexes, your silent compromises. So what if you could reclaim those instincts not to manipulate, but to move through the world awake? Because maybe the goal isn't to play the game better, but to play it without losing yourself. Maybe the real power isn't dominance, it's discernment. The ability to see clearly, act deliberately, and still feel deeply. The question isn't whether you're playing a role. You are, we all are. The real question is, who's writing your script? Now let's return to Machiavelli one last time, not for tactics, but for insight. Because at the end of the game, what remains is not who won, but who became aware. Power doesn't reside in crowns or titles. It lives in perception, in poise, in silence held just a second too long. But the deepest form of power is not the kind that moves nations, it is the kind that reclaims the self. Machiavelli's greatest insight was never about cruelty or deception. That's the myth, the surface-level red. What he truly offered was something far more dangerous: lucidity, the ability to see the world, and oneself, without ornament, without illusion, as it is. That clarity can feel like cold water at first, bracing, unsettling. It forces you to question every virtue you were taught to revere, every story you've told yourself about goodness, loyalty, identity. But within that disruption lies liberation. Because once you recognize that the world does not reward purity, you stop expecting it to. And in doing so, you stop waiting for permission to live wisely. The goal was never to become Machiavellian. It was to become awake. You now see the masks others wear, not to judge them, but to understand them. You catch the subtle power plays, the passive deference, the strategic retreats. You start to notice your own behaviors not as random impulses, but as learned maneuvers. You begin to ask, whose approval am I still chasing? What fear am I managing? What power have I been giving away simply by not recognizing it was mine? Philosophers like Nietzsche echoed the same cry in a different key. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. You realize then that discipline is sovereignty, that boundaries are a language, that silence isn't absence, it's presence in its most potent form. But here's where the shift happens. After you've seen the mechanisms, after you've dissected the game, you come to a strange and tender realization. You don't need to win every time. You just need to choose your game. And not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Because power, when rooted in desperation, becomes manipulation. But power grounded in awareness becomes grace. You start to understand that sometimes the strongest move is not to respond, not to prove, not to please, but to hold your center and let others reveal themselves. You let go of control not because you giving up, but because you've learned that control is most powerful when it's not needed. You can speak with intent. You can choose presence over performance. You can influence without attachment. And in that space between perception and identity, you meet something ancient, self-respect. This is the final move in the Machiavellian dance. Not deceit, not domination, but discernment. The capacity to see without flinching, to navigate without betraying your core. To play the game with your eyes open and your soul intact. You are no longer the pawn, not because you've become the king, but because you've stepped outside the board. You've stopped being moved. You are the one who chooses. So now the question is no longer, who's winning? The real question is, what are you becoming? Because strategy without awareness is manipulation. But awareness without strategy is helplessness. Only when you integrate the two, sight and skill, presence and performance, do you begin to truly move through the world with power. And not the kind of power others hand to you or fear from you, but the kind that no one can take away. Thank you for watching.